today, there was some familiarity. We heard a lot from the defense and a lot from the prosecution about arguments that we had heard before. And it was almost like, wait a minute, this stuff has been decided, and that's why we're here at a sentencing hearing. So a lot of that went by, and then there were things to clear up that were specific. We talked through those.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Friday, November 18th installment of the Silicon Insider, the only uncensored look at life and business in the Valley. My name is Mike Malone. As you know, and I'm here with special contributor Scott Budman. As you know, technology reporter for NBC News Bay Area. Our producer is Jordan Henderson. Our East Coast correspondent is Bob Grove. And our host, as always, is the Silicon Valley Business Journal. Now, folks, we're going to do something a little bit different this week. We're awaiting the sentencing in the Elizabeth Holmes Theranos case. So we're going to do a shorter initial show today, then edit in that breaking story as soon as we get it. Scott will be on the scene, as always, because he has been joined at the hip with this case now for what, 14 months?
Yeah,
long.
About that, yeah.
Okay. So let's get into the news, and we'll go for a little while, and then we'll do a quick pause, and we'll cut in after the case. So it's been a wild week, obviously. I mean, it wasn't like I had a shortage of stories that we could, do a short show today. I mean, it's just incredible. Now, I assume you're going to be in the courtroom tomorrow?
Yes, the courtroom will be where the sentencing is held, and it'll be interesting. We've seen even in the last few days the defense side, Elizabeth Holmes side, giving in letters, including from Cory Booker, sort of testimonies to her character and why she should not go away. Her side is asking for a maximum of 18 months in prison. And then on the other side, you have the prosecution putting its letter forward, asking for 15 years in prison, along with $800,000 in financial restitution to investors. So obviously, I guess we see why there hasn't been a deal cut. These two sides are miles apart, and it'll be interesting to see what the judge ultimately decides for her sentence.
I'm amazed how far the span of the arguments have moved over. I mean, there was talk of suspended sentence, give her, time at home, time served, community service, something pretty benign. And now her own defense is saying, please, just 18 months.
I'm not sure how...
Something come out that we don't know about?
Well, no, I think we know everything that's come out. I don't know all that much about how these work, but at some point, right, the arguments that we started to get after the trial ended of, hey, she should have a new case, or hey, this should be dismissed, there just wasn't enough evidence, you're right, rapidly turned to, okay, we'll settle for 18 months. And I don't know exactly where that figure came from, but given what the prosecution wants, that would be a very light sentence. I just don't know where the judge stands on any of this, really, other than he ran a pretty tight ship of a case, and then he gets the final say.
If the prosecution gets their way, not to be sentimental, because you're not supposed to be sentimental about this, but she would literally only see her children until adulthood on visitation days.
Right. I mean, one of her sons, she has an 18-month-old right now and is expecting a second child. So the guess is, according to some of my lawyer friends, that whatever sentence is handed down will be delayed until she can have the child, and then perhaps spend some time with that newborn. But right, I mean, that would be, if it's up in the area of 10 to 15 years, a long time when you have two very young children at home. And again, I don't know if that comes into account, but this is what is being faced right now.
Well, that's pretty intense. That's pretty dark. Okay, well, I'm looking forward to your report tomorrow. We'll have a lot to talk about. In the meantime, you would have thought that layoffs would be the big story this week, but it turns out FTX. This has turned into, I don't want to say cluster, but this is an unbelievable story. I mean, it's being compared to Broadcom and WorldCom and Bernie Madoff and all the rest as an incredible Ponzi scheme. Now, we've often talked about cybercurrency as being kind of a Ponzi scheme, but this is the real thing by the looks of it.
Right.
I mean, billions have been lost.
Right. FTX was an exchange. They had a hedge fund. What business a crypto exchange has in having a hedge fund is beyond me, but it just got more and more dangerous. They issued tokens and the tokens were worthless. It all came crashing down. And, you mentioned a Ponzi scheme, and I don't want to call it that necessarily, but let's say that the only way this thing makes money is if other people keep investing. I think that is the definition of
I believe that is a Ponzi scheme. Yeah.
Yeah, and it seemed
billions off of that. He gave it to the Democratic Party during the elections. I mean, he got to be this sort of major figure handing out huge sums of money to his, causes he cared about.
Right, you're talking about Sam Bankman-Fried, the CEO of FTX, and
on the list of unusual kid CEO tycoons, he's kind of up there. He's a pretty odd guy.
Well, I mean, sure, he donated tens of millions of dollars to the Democratic Party. He was a major philanthropist in even other ways. He was living on the Bahamas, all of 30 years old. You saw him dress for formal occasions in T-shirts and shorts. We just haven't gotten over whatever it is in society that allows these young tech guys to get away with that. And it's all guys. A woman who dressed like that wouldn't be called a genius. She'd be called sloppy. For some reason, this guy, Sam Bankman-Fried, was called a genius until everyone realized that he wasn't. And now you have lawsuits, you have tens of millions of dollars in losses. You have a guy in the Bahamas who is, speaking of fraud trials, I mean, who knows what's ahead for him, if even he's brought back to the U.S. And it just boggles the mind how quickly $16 billion of his own fortune and $32 billion, which was the value of FTX, was lost. I mean, this was a fast, quick disaster, even by by crypto standards, and that's saying something.
And as of Thursday, he started blaming his girlfriend for all of this, showing that chivalry certainly isn't dead. I mean, he didn't even man up and take the cost of this thing. No, my girlfriend, she influenced me to make all these bad investments.
Well, I mean, none of this is making him look good. And I just hope that people don't get constantly fooled by this kind of thing. I mean, there are plenty of people who jumped into FTX and are still in Binance and are in Bitcoin. And I don't know what they think the outcome of this is going to be if they haven't been paying attention. But at some point, you just have to say, good luck with this, but it's not the banks, it's not dollars, it's not backed by any federal insurance. It's just the Wild West.
Yeah, and like a bank, FTX couldn't cover its outstanding debts. I mean, banks reinvested in other ways, and I guess that's what he was trying to do, but it caught up with him. And he's pulling a lot of people, famous people, celebrities who signed on and promoted it, like Tom Brady, into the black hole behind him. And he's ruining a lot of reputation, just like Bernie Madoff did.
Right. There are lawsuits now that include Tom Brady and Steph Curry and Larry David. You saw all the Super Bowl ads.
Sure.
I mean, think about, how far this stuff has fallen since the Super Bowl. We had all these multiple ads, including for FTX, including for crypto.com. FTX was on an arena. Bitcoin was trading for 62,000 a coin. And that was only 10 months ago. I mean, a lot can change in a short period of time. This is not investing.
It turns out to be accurate. Remember, the whole commercial is people saying, you can't do that. It can't be done. Well, here we are. Right. Some people are going all the way, to the extreme and saying, cyber currency is dead. No one will ever trust it again.
I mean,
I can see seriously wounded. I can see, the Justice Department coming in and FCC and everyone coming in and asserting real controls now on that entire industry.
Perhaps, but I'll push back just in a couple of ways. One, remember, this is not a very large part of our economy at all. It's a tiny part of our economy. So I don't know how seriously, the SEC will be taking this. That said, people are losing real money. That also said, Bitcoin fell from about 21,000.
This is going to come down.
Right. Bitcoin fell from about 21,000 to 15,000 in the day of the huge crash when we realized what was going on with FTX. It has since gone up to about 16.5. So instead of just completely capitulating and saying we're done with all of this, Bitcoin investors are saying, hey, we're gonna hold on for dear life. We're gonna hodl for a little while longer. And again, I don't know why, but people are going to stick with this. And I don't just mean people who are sticking with it because they think it's going to be an honest to goodness currency. They're sticking with it for the speculative investment part of it. And again, it's a tiny sliver of our economy overall, but it's starting to get real money. As you yourself said, it's got big investors. It's got celebrity endorsements. It has the lion's share of Super Bowl advertising just 10 months ago. So yeah, maybe it's due for some investigations and some crackdowns, because I would venture to bet that a lot of the people that lost their money were young people who were sort of experimenting with this and who didn't have the money to lose.
And what word have you always used with this industry? I'm thinking about getting a t-shirt made that says Silicon Insider, underneath it, quote, "It's frothy."
Frothy I would use for something that's exciting and maybe getting a little too exciting. The number one hit that's on the charts for 47 weeks, an investment that has nothing behind it is not frothy. That's just speculative, and it's a mistake.
And dangerous.
Yes.
Well, you hear from the new chief executive officer, John J. Ray III, and he said, quote, I've never heard a quote like this before in finance. "Never in my career have I seen such a complete failure of corporate controls and such a complete absence of trustworthy financial information. From a compromised system's integrity and faulty regulatory oversight abroad to the concentration of control in the hands of a very small group of inexperienced, unsophisticated, and potentially compromised individuals, this situation is unprecedented." Apparently, they didn't even have board meetings. They didn't take notes on those non-existent board meetings, and they never filed the notes, which you're supposed to do with the state. They didn't do any of that stuff. It sounds like they just sat around like in a dorm room and ran this multi-billion-dollar enterprise just on whatever they felt like doing.
It does sound like that, although I don't think it was a dorm room. I think it was what they're saying, a $40 million place in the Bahamas. No doubt.
That's where he's hiding right now. Is there extradition from the Bahamas?
I don't know.
I think there is.
Yeah, I think there is. And I imagine it's a matter of time before there's, that Sam Bankman-Fried has some whatever legal action taken against him. After all these lawsuits are filed, and there's tens of millions of dollars missing. Yeah,
and here's what's going to hang them. They had a single unsecured group email used to access private keys and sensitive data around the world, and they often communicated through applications that auto-deleted in short order and asked employees to do the same. So it looks like they were kind of covering their tracks all the way through this. That looks a whole lot more like criminal conspiracy rather than just, plain stupidity and incompetence.
Is that the digital modern version of shredding documents?
I think so. So we'll probably see more of it. Okay. Let's get to layoffs, because I'm here. Not only did I hear from all over the media around the world about, I'm sure you did too, about Elizabeth Holmes, but also about, is this the end of Silicon Valley? I was on the BBC World Radio with the guy from layoffs.fyi, and he said there's been 130,000 layoffs in tech so far. And as you noted last week, we're up to about 35,000 now here in the Silicon Valley and Bay Area. Amazon is preparing to lay off 10,000 workers, with hundreds of them in the Bay Area. And then we got all the smaller ones. I mean, we got the famous ones like Meta and Twitter, but Stripe, Salesforce, Zillow, Snap, Robinhood, Microsoft, all laying off people. Is this the beginning, or have we peaked?
The layoffs, I think the beginning. Don't forget, we've got Cisco just in the last 24 hours. We've got some big companies. Right. Amazon CEO Andy Jassy also saying, hey, it's likely that layoffs will continue, that there will be more rounds at Amazon. Shout out, by the way, to layoff.fyi. That's a fantastic site to follow and keep track of these things. I think it's the beginning of...
Guy's good.
Yeah, I think it's the beginning of layoffs. I don't think it's anywhere near or anything near the end of Silicon Valley. Remember, a lot of these companies laying people off now are just going back to the levels that they were at even during the height of the pandemic when they grew so much. It surprised a lot of us that the pandemic it not only didn't hurt tech companies, it actually helped them because people were so dependent on them and they grew so incredibly fast. And now we're realizing, okay, we're not quite as dependent day to day on that technology as we were before. So it makes sense to trim the sails. I think that's what we're seeing. Mix that in with almost recessionary times. People are dialing back their spending. Corporations are dialing back their spending. And for many businesses, most importantly, advertisers are dialing back their spending. You've got that toxic mix of our bottom lines aren't going to look that good for earning reports. Our stock prices are way down. It's time to shed people. And that's brutal and it's hard, but it doesn't mean that the tech industry is over. It means it's going through one of those adjustments and a seismic adjustment, a big shakeup. A lot of people are going to be out of work, but we're giving a lot of attention and a lot of oxygen to what's going on at Twitter, and that is crazy. And that is, absolute chaos. But the rest of the industry, I think, is doing what it needs to do to keep the bottom line strong for investors.
Yeah, I got the usual question: is this the end of the valley? And I said no. This has happened 10 times before. It's not even the worst one so far. But I will say, not only are the big companies doing these big showy layoffs, but underneath the surface, it turns out a lot of the smaller companies are about to do the same thing. I was talking to a woman today, her brother and her brother-in-law working at 2 startups, both said that their startups have already begun to institute a 30% layoff. And I bet that's happening to hundreds of companies out here right now. So we may get the real bombshell in the next couple of weeks, sometime between Thanksgiving and Christmas. So we'll see.
Yeah, and I think Christmas is going to be a big indicator of where we're going, not only for our overall economy, but also for hardware. Hardware hasn't laid off nearly as much as software, but they kind of go hand in hand. If we sell fewer iPhones and fewer MacBooks, we sell fewer chips, fewer cars, fewer chips, etc. So how will holiday shopping be, and what will that mean going forward? And I think that's going to be interesting, and I think the tech industry will be watching that even more closely than usual.
Well, good news and bad news. The rumor is the Fed rate increase in December is probably only going to be 0.5 percentage point, not 0.75. But one person close to the Fed predicted that in the long term, they're going to have to get all the way up to 7 or 7.5 points total to beat this recession, this inflation.
And they're saying,
see.
Right, they're likely to raise more, but perhaps slow down the rate. We have seen the Dow and the NASDAQ go up recently, and I think that's because there's this feeling that maybe we're going to slow at least the pace of interest rate hikes.
Right. So, okay, well, let's keep, light candles for a happy holiday. And folks, we're going to cut away and we'll come back. Scott will be at a very different location and we'll talk about the results of the trial today. Hi, everyone. We're back with Scott returned from covering the Elizabeth Holmes penalty round today, penalty phase. Just to condense it, 11 years and 11.25 years, 11 years and 3 months at the federal penitentiary in Dublin, also known as Pleasanton Penitentiary. What are your thoughts? Well, first of all, let me ask you, what time did you get up this morning?
So I was up at about 4:15. There are only so many seats in the courtroom. And as we learned during Elizabeth Holmes's trial, when she was on the stand, we have to get there early because there are no reserved seats for journalists or anything like that. So today was a very early day, a long day, but you want to see the end of something that you covered for so long. So it's been a high energy day as well.
I was thinking of you getting up at 4 a.m. a year ago on cold, wet days, and now it's come all the way around again, but it's finally over. I guess there's still a restitution hearing coming up, but you won't be privy to that one, right?
I'm not sure. The judge actually did put that off into the future, but he hinted very strongly that the $800 million the prosecution was seeking in restitution is going to be much, much lower. So it's not like Rupert Murdoch and Henry Kissinger and Betsy DeVos will be making dollar for dollar what they lost. Not that we expected that. The big drama was not so much on the money, I don't think, but on how much time Elizabeth Holmes will get.
Well, now it was presented by your legal expert on NBC Bay Area that she actually might consider this a win, given what could have happened, that the judge deciding the case points and then comparing it to the recommended time to be served actually took the low end of the range at 11 years and 3 months.
Right. It's interesting because I was listening to him talk about that, and I had not heard of that before. I don't cover court all that much, but I also know that the parole board, which the judge also listens to, had recommended 9 years. So I think there was somewhere in a fairly tight range that Judge Davila was working with, and it seemed like he stuck with that range. 11 years feels like a long sentence, obviously, for a white-collar crime, but it was less than what the prosecution wanted. It's hard to know what people who wanted more are going to say. She was, up for as much as 20 years, but did get 11, and yet that still feels like a long time. So I guess you could go either way. There were so many guesses, Mike. It was just crazy. Up to the minute she was sentenced, people were telling me, oh, it's going to be a few months or it's going to be 20 years. So few people ended up right.
Give me a sense. You mentioned I saw you do several stand-ups at the courthouse, and then I watched your camera guy running down the light rail track because it turned out that Holmes had gone out a back door, and then I watched you in the studio doing a stand-up at 4:30, and then I guess you did another one at 6. I mean, you have had a hell of a day.
Well, first off, bless you for tuning in so much. We should do a marketing study on you. But yeah, it's been a big day, and it's just one of those things where you want to be fluid with the different media. This was a textbook case, and I mean the entire case, where most of the audience lived on social media. People all over the place couldn't get enough of this Elizabeth Holmes trial. And today was another huge day on Twitter for me, just pumping the news out. And then as a news station, it's exciting when instead of just saying, well, we'll stand here then, and then we'll roll that tape then, it's more fluid. And yeah, you're gonna chase the defendant, and then you're gonna stand there, and then we want you to come in here. And frankly, days like that are exciting, and why I got into the business in the first place.
They did a long shot of you, and it's you standing alone with the camera aimed at you on the tripod, and then behind you is this enormous swarm of media. Were they all taking turns in that location doing stand-ups, or are you the man because this is your town?
Well, no, I mean, we decided we would have a camera person in that big scrum, and I was in that scrum this morning, but in the afternoon, the goal was have a camera in the scrum to get Elizabeth Holmes walking out, but let's go live with our guy in the courtroom, that was me, and just talk about it. Because again, you couldn't see any of it that was going down. You could follow the tweets, but if I'm tweeting out, wow, Elizabeth Holmes is getting very emotional in her testimony, there's something about talking that through as opposed to just sending out a tweet about it. And I think that was the goal, was to let's get on the air and talk about what it was like when she was faced by a victim, or when she had a chance to talk, and just to sort of, get that out, because again, people can't seem to get enough of this, whether on the small screen or the big screen.
Like real life reporting. You don't get to do this very often in your life, Give me a sense of inside the courtroom. How crowded was it?
It was the most crowded I've ever been in a courtroom. This was all just shoulder to shoulder, 9 people in a booth that's sort of like a pew in a church, and usually it's 4, maybe 5. This was 9 in every one. There were family members there, obviously a lot of press. Some of her friends were there. There were law students. There were people who show up to this trial because they're just flat out interested. And there were some victims, some people who came either to speak or to represent those who had lost money, or I mean, there's just so much interest in this, and a lot of people managed to get in if they got up early enough in the morning.
How big was your global audience? How many eyeballs looked at your filings on Facebook and Twitter?
I mean, the Twitter audience, I think overall, I'd have to add it up, but it was probably at in the millions total. I mean, it was just hit after hit after hit. People are really spreading this around. I have no idea about the eyeballs for TV, but yeah, it was you can tell when something is kind of a hit on social media, when people are really passing it around. And during the times when I would stay off Twitter and try to pay attention to the court case, the legal proceedings, people would be tweeting back at me, give me more, I want more right now.
Wow.
And you realize that's, you're the window into this trial that they're so fascinated with.
So it started officially at 10 a.m., but the verdict didn't come down till like 3.
The sentence. Right.
The sentencing, I mean, what took so long?
This Judge Davila is, I mean, he's very thorough. Both cases, Holmes and Balwani, lasted a long time because he let everybody speak and say their piece. And I think he's just a very thorough, efficient judge who doesn't want to get to a point where people say, hey, something went wrong during the trial. So he really dotted every I. And today, there was some familiarity. We heard a lot from the defense and a lot from the prosecution about arguments that we had heard before. And it was almost like, wait a minute, this stuff has been decided, and that's why we're here at a sentencing hearing. So a lot of that went by, and then there were things to clear up that were specific. We talked through those. There were some victim statements. Holmes got a chance to speak. And then there was a quick break of about 15 minutes. And then Judge Davila said, okay, sentencing time. And that took about a half an hour because he stretched it out with talk of, you would have been proud, the Valley of the Heart's Delight and Apple's founding in the garage, and how Silicon Valley is this and that. And what it can't be is fraudulent. And that's really when he brought it home. And so as you heard the thing go down the line, you could see this was going to end badly for Elizabeth Holmes.
I understand that she gave a tearful, contrite statement, brief, but, fairly moving.
Yeah, all those things. And unlike the Elizabeth Holmes that we heard on the stand a year ago, who was still confident in explaining what was going on and how she wanted to change the world, this was, like you say, a very contrite Elizabeth Holmes. She spoke a brief time. She stood up. She was in tears, talking about how she regrets her mistakes. She founded this company literally half a lifetime ago for her. And she says she's learned a lot. She feels bad for her investors, her employees, her family. And there's so many things she'd do again. I don't think it changed Judge Davila's mind, but it was like so many things that she's done, impressive and thoughtful.
Though I detected when you were talking about it in your stand-up that the effect of her statement was tempered by some of the statements by the victims, especially the Schultz family.
Right.
That one seemed to kind of affect you a little bit too. What happened?
Yeah, that was, I think, the most meaningful, emotional part of the trial. Not even what Holmes said, or excuse me, part of the day's sentencing was Alex Schultz. Now, his father is George Schultz.
Yeah.
American icon, big investor in Theranos, board member. His son is Tyler Schultz, Theranos employee turned whistleblower. And if you read Bad Blood by John Carreyrou or sort of followed the case, you know that family was really torn apart because George Schultz, the older, was really fighting with Tyler Schultz, the younger, because they disagreed on Elizabeth Holmes. And when Alex Schultz, the father, sort of the middleman in this, got up, he pointed right at Elizabeth Holmes and said, you caused a huge strife in my family. My family will never be the same because of you. So this isn't someone who was saying I'm an investor. It wasn't someone who was saying I was a patient. It was, in a lot of ways, even more personal than that, in that it really affected their family.
So the family was in enormous tension right at the time of Secretary Schultz's death.
Right.
So it's never going to be reconciled. I assume that.
And Tyler Schultz has spoken about that, saying that's one of his great regrets, is that it turned out that way. And Alex Schultz, his father, and George's son also spoke about that, saying that really the family wound can't be healed. It just can't. And that was because of Theranos.
Well, tell me about the actual sentencing moment. Was there a shock in the crowd? Was it quiet?
It
Was
was quiet, and it was, for me, there was a second of wishing I had done better in mathematics, because God bless Judge Davila, he announced the sentencing in months. And so he did something like 138 months. And I'm like, oh, that doesn't mean what I have to do. I'm literally on a calculator.
divide by 12. Yeah, real quick.
Yeah. And it was just one of those where you couldn't just say how many years. Anyway, it was silence. It was a breath that people took, because you knew it could be serious. You knew it could be a long sentence, but to hear it 11 years, nobody doesn't know how long that is, young or old. That's a long sentence. And it was a finality to all of this. I mean, I know there's likely to be an appeal or whatever, but this was the end of a long line and a very serious end. And so when he said it, there was almost a minute of silence, of people just sort of digesting it. And I was watching, when I wasn't doing the calculations on my phone to figure out how long it was, I was watching Elizabeth to see what she did. And she was just looking forward for a while, and even her family. Nobody moved right away. And then she turned around and tearfully hugged her family. And that part, people then said, okay, we have permission to stand up and do our hugs or our outdoor things if we're journalists and whatever. But there was a little minute there where I think people just digested what they had heard.
Well, and this a 38-year-old woman who's pregnant with a toddler, and if she gets the full sentence, if she carries it out completely, she's gonna be 50 years old by the time, and her kids are going to be on the brink of being teenagers.
Right. And I mean, I don't know, this is something we can't relate to, most of us, right? I mean, she got pregnant after the guilty verdicts.
Yeah.
And, say what you will, there's a time, and, family planning is family planning, but it's hard to imagine that there wasn't at least the possibility in that calculation of, I'm going to be in prison for quite a while as soon as this baby is born.
Now she's going to be up in Dublin, which is actually where Lori Loughlin went to, right. Apparently. Not for quite as long, but it's only an hour away from her home on the peninsula. So, and I guess this is a minimum security federal facility, so she can have visitors a lot and that sort of thing. But her kids are going to see her most of the time through a screen.
Yeah, I'm not sure how it works, but right, this is a white-collar criminal who's likely to stay in the Bay Area, and will have two very, very young children. And right, and I mean, again, whatever is next is going to be rough, no doubt.
Now, you got asked what were the lessons of all this? Will it change the Valley? I noticed the legal expert that was on, he came down pretty strong that Silicon Valley has a broken morality, and this has got to be fixed and changed. And I got kind of a chill down my back, because this is a town built on risk-taking and entrepreneurship. And there's haven't been that many cases of people crossing the line into illegality. And to tar the entire town as being broken because of Elizabeth Holmes. I mean, we've talked about this the last couple of years on this podcast. Is she exemplary of Silicon Valley, or is she an anomaly? And my sense is she's actually kind of an anomaly, that we've had thousands of companies get started here, and how many of them really cross the line into full-blown illegality?
I agree with that. I think she is a bit of an abnormality, call it that. It's not abnormal to get ahead of your skis, get too cocky with money, and
hyperbole in promotion. Yeah,
exactly. Sure. Hyperbole, even lying to investors. But to put out a product that's involved with somebody's health, when you know that product doesn't work, makes her the abnormality. And obviously she's going to prison because of investor fraud. But I know there are a lot of people out there that do not forgive her or Theranos for putting those machines out there and lying to the investors, saying they work, they're in the military, they're all over the place. And so if there is a lesson to be learned, I can see board of directors in the future telling their young hotshot CEOs, look, be aggressive, be confident, raise a ton of money, but we need to spend a little extra time to make sure we're not getting too far over our skis and going into illegality, because maybe, just maybe, people are going to be watching a little more closely now. And this becomes a cautionary tale that in the future is healthy for tech and consumers.
And you and I both know women executives that are furious about this because they've been, they've been tarred with the same brush, that they have trouble enough getting money from venture capitalists, but now they're going to be looked upon twice. Like, well, is she scamming us? Is this another Elizabeth Holmes?
Right. I mean, the Valley needs to put that aside right quick if it wants to succeed. Because again, absolutely. Right, Elizabeth Holmes is an abnormality, I would say. I think we agree on that. And we need more female founders. We need more female VCs. We need more money in the pipeline for females. And this, it's obviously unfortunate, and I understand where those executives are coming from, but to say that this is going to put a chill on funding female-founded companies is terrible. It should not happen. And I would say the same for healthcare and biotech. We need people out there to be chasing and raising money to fight diseases, but to certainly do it in a legal way and a non-fraudulent way.
And the irony is, if she had said the product just doesn't work early on, before she began to lie, and the company had died, she would have had what was considered a successful failure. And she probably would have been able to start another company and raise a lot of money and do it again. So right. She cut her own throat twice on this thing. And, she'll stand as an object lesson. If she wanted fame, she got it in Silicon Valley history. She's going to go down. She'll be remembered forever, but I'm not sure it's the way she planned it.
Exactly. I mean, hubris goes a long way towards ruining careers, and you're right. I was asked about that today. We in Silicon Valley celebrate failure. We refund the failures because then they end up bringing us PayPal and Tesla and Google and all that stuff, Hotmail, after they failed. Right. But not this. This was illegal, and it hurt a lot of people. And so, right, there's hubris. There's just keeping going and then lying to people for too long, and it caught up with Elizabeth Holmes and Sunny Balwani.
And I'll tell you another Valley truth, and that is, somebody in a few years is actually going to come up with a working version of the Theranos product.
Bold
statement. That's how there are so many dead technologies that revive 15, 20 years later in this town. And I'm wagering that it'll be for that too. And she'll probably learn about it sitting up there in Dublin.
Maybe so. Maybe so. But yeah.
All right. Well, you still have to go on the air again, don't you?
I do, yes.
All right. Well, get some sleep after that, and have a great weekend. And folks, I'll just say goodbye. I'm not going to read all the usual stuff. Thanks for listening in, as always, and watching, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.